Good morning, everyone. Today we are presenting our A2 project, which focuses on reframing the problem within the Parramatta Engineering Innovation Hub through a post-occupancy review. Our presentation builds on issues identified in A1, but instead of only pointing out the visible problems, we have used a human-centered design approach to better understand the deeper spatial and design conditions affecting students' experiences everyday use within the building. This project is a post-occupancy review of the Parramatta Innovation Hub with a focus on how the building functions as an everyday learning environment for students. Rather than only looking at what the building was designed to be, post-occupancy reviews looks at how the space is actually experienced once it's occupied and used in practice. This is important because a building may look successful in design, but its real performance is shown through how well it supports the people using it every day. For our group, this meant focusing on lived students' experiences and approaching the review through a human-centered design. Why this reviews matters. In A1, our group identified a number of recurring issues across the building. These included problems that affected access, movement, comfort, maintenance, safety, and overall usability. At first, these looked like separate issues, but in A2, we moved beyond that surface level and started reframing the deeper design problems behind them. What became clear was that the issue was not only the faults themselves, but the way the placement and relationships of building elements affected how spaces function in practice. This matters because spatial conditions interrupt everyday student use. Then the building is not fully supporting the learning experience it was intended to provide.
So our main research question is, how can spatial and design conditions within PAY be framed to better support student experience and everyday use? We're not just identifying problems, we are focusing on how these conditions can actually be improved over time based on how students use the space in reality. Across multiple areas in PAY, we found that spaces don't always support how students actually use them. Instead of the environment supporting students, students are often forced to adapt their behavior, whether that's changing where they sit, adjusting their position, or avoiding certain areas completely. We also notice these issues aren't isolated. This highlights a clear gap between the original design intention and the real use experience. So rather than treating these as separate problems, we take a reframing approach to understand how the system as a whole can be improved. For methodology, we used a human-centered design approach to understand how students actually interact with space and PAY. On the on the right top corner, the console model shows how we identify a specific issue, who's affected, and when it becomes a problem. For example, limited accessibility for wheelchair users during lectures. This helps us understand how certain spaces do not support all users equally. We then used empathy mapping to explore how students experience this condition. As shown, students report discomfort, frustration, and difficulty focusing, with physical impacts such as poor posture and lack of personal space. Finally, the storyboard illustrates real interactions that are possible within this space. In the example, a student approaches the sing area and encountered exposed pipes, leading to discomfort and potential injury. This shows how design issues directly affect user safety and experience. Overall, these methods allowed us to compare how spaces are intended to function versus how they are actually used.
To answer our research questions, we used several design and analysis methods that helped us move from observation to deeper framing. First, affinity mapping helped us organize recurring observations into broader themes such as circulation, accessibility, comfort, and usability. Second, user journey map helped us trace how students moved and experienced the building step by step, showing where spatial conditions interrupt everyday use. Third, sketch and spatial analysis allowed us to examine the placement and relationship of building elements and how these affect the way spaces function. Finally, we applied the 9 frames to look at the issue through different design lenses, including context, user, function, structure, and future possibilities. Reframing outcomes. Through these methods, we're able to move beyond seeing each issue as an isolated fault. Instead, we identified a set of connected spatial problems that shaped how the building functioned as a whole. Our main finding was that the placement and interactions of the building elements strongly affected movement, access, comfort, usability. In other words, the issue was not just certain things were wrong, but their positioning disrupted how the surrounding spaces worked in practice. This reframing gave us a stronger basis for a design change because it showed where spatial improvements could better support student experience and everyday use of the Parramatta Engineering Innovation Hub.
In this stage, we focused on observing how students actually use the spaces within PEIH rather than just photographing the space itself like we did in A1. We revisited the areas we explored in the previous assessment, and we found out how, in most cases, students tend to enter briefly and leave quickly due to the poor layout of some of these areas. As you can see on the left side, students are forced to interact with things such as pillars and staircases due to low spatial clarity. In the middle, it's obvious that spaces are neglected because of their messy layout. And finally, on the right, we observed students often get. While we were filling out our mirror maps, we started getting an idea of what possible solutions we might propose for each of our design problems. As you can see that we started getting an idea regarding innovations while doing the journey maps. In the opportunity section, we were able to quickly brainstorm concepts. Then in our empathy maps, we really gained a proper understanding of how deeply each problem was affecting the user. Finally, in our foresights, gathering info from both the empathy and journey maps, we were able to write down what the underlying problem was in each design that needed to be fixed. Moving on to experimentation, we sat together as a group. In one of the initial weeks, A2 was introduced and wrote down how we can approach solving each of our design problems. We shared our ideas with each other in order to validate them and then proceeded to create surveys based on each of our case studies to further confirm our hypothesis. The surveys indicated how students don't find themselves using the kitchen and other spaces often because of their spatial layout. This allowed us to come up with more personalized solutions for students as we gained first-hand info from 4 different students, which 2 of them were first years and 1 of them was a 3rd year and 1 of them was a 4th year. From these surveys and experimentation, we developed a more refined spatial proposal that focused on reconfiguring the environment to better align with the students' needs. These designs we introduced clearly redefine zones so that they can better support different types of activities and foster social interaction, individual use, and functional tasks. Hallway paths and other areas were improved to create a more intuitive flow, while elements that reduce visual exposure helped increase psychological comfort. The aim of us creating these prototypes was not just to improve the physical layout, but it was to create a space that feels more inviting, appealing, and usable for the students so that they can remain in them for longer periods of time. Lastly, our key findings highlight the underlying causes behind the underutilization of these spaces, which was not simply just a result of poor functionality, but it was largely driven by user perception and experience. Factors such as low visibility, lack of spatial clarity, poor quality of instructions given contributed to discomfort and avoidant behaviors among students. This shows that even well-equipped spaces can fail if they do not align with user expectations and social behavior. Ultimately, designers must prioritize the needs of the students so that the final design aligns with the user behavior rather than intention. Because if it doesn't, students are more likely to neglect those areas.
This project explores how the design and layout of learning spaces within the Parramatta Engineering Innovation Hub influence everyday student use. While the building is intended to support modern learning, various design and spatial factors can still impact comfort, safety, and overall productivity. The project is based on observational analysis supported by photogenic evidence, focusing on recurring spatial issues within the environment. The aim is to better understand how these spaces function in practice and identify opportunities for improvement. The central question guiding this project is how spatial and environmental design within PEIH can be better improved to support everyday student needs. This is explored through two key aspects. The first considers how users adapt their behavior when spaces do not fully meet their requirements. The second examines how a human-centered design approach can improve the relationship between users and their environment. Overall, this focus is on the difference between intended design and the actual use in practice. Observations identified several recurring spatial and environmental issues across the learning spaces. These generally relate to safety considerations in high traffic areas, the suitability and comfort of study environments, and accessibility of essential resources. Issues with organization, maintenance, and visibility of building services were also noted, which can affect both functionality and the overall user experience. Together, these findings suggest inconsistencies between design intentions and how spaces are being used day to day. Several general improvements could enhance the functionality of these spaces, like maintaining clear and safe circulation areas would improve accessibility and reduce risk. Improving the comfort and flexibility of study areas would better support different learning needs. Increasing access to essential resources would enhance usability, particularly for device-based study. Better organization and concealment of building services would improve both safety and visual quality. Overall, these adjustments would contribute to a more efficient and user-friendly learning environment. These findings indicate that users often need to adjust their behavior in response to limitations within the built environment. Instead of spaces fully supporting user needs, individuals frequently adapt their actions and choices to work around design constraints. This highlights a gap between architectural intent and lived experience. Applying a human-centered design approach could better help align spatial design with actual user behavior, improving comfort, safety, and usability.